Hi, thank you very much, and thanks to all of you out there for joining us. I appreciate your time, especially given the time of the year that it is. I'm here in Texas, and people are madly busy in schools doing standardized testing and assessments for all the accountability stuff that goes on. So I know you guys have a lot going on at schools as well, and again, thank you for being there, and thank you especially for putting in who is there. So yeah, Megan, it has officially started. So I am Kimberly Vannest. I'm a professor at Texas A&M University, and just a little bit about my background. I started out as a general education high school teacher in business, voc ed. I did accounting, marketing. Back in the day, it was called fashion merchandising. I even knew what a carbon copy was. So I'm dating myself just a little bit for those of you out there. And we did typing. And then, in fact, my predecessor thought maybe that computers would be a fad back then. So I coached girls basketball, and I moved into teaching special education, and I worked with kids with emotional and behavior disorders, and then I worked in a self-contained classroom, and I actually taught in a shopping mall doing transition and functional training. So I've done quite a few things. I work here now at A&M in the BCBA program, and I teach master's and doctoral level courses primarily for those who want to be in the professorate or lead school districts. So howdy, Linda. Glad to know you have a child here at A&M. I think there's some technical support, maybe Ann and Megan, so that you can hear things. I believe you can either call in on the phone or that somebody can help you get some audio. There we go. Thank you so much, Ann. And thank you to the folks at Pearson for sponsoring the webinar today. Appreciate that very much. So I am, there we go, lost my arrow from moving forward. Today I would like to introduce you to some work that I've been doing over the last couple of decades and overview the intervention guides for school psychologists, for classroom use, the tip sheets for parents, talk about where it all comes from, talk about how you might use it in schools and how I use it and some of my colleagues use it, and then provides lots of time for questions and application. And feel free to type those out in the chat room over on the side. They're going to be capturing those questions. I'll try to take them all at the end, or if something comes up that seems like it fits in the context of what we're talking about right at that minute, I'll go ahead and add that in as we go. So thanks, Megan. I'm glad you can hear me. That's terrific. So yes, all slides will be made available, everybody. They'll send those all out afterwards with any certificates of participation, things that are needed for verifying. That takes a few days for them to get around to everybody. I believe there were 1,100 people registered for the webinar this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're located. So we're going to talk about using these intervention materials in a multi-tiered system of support for prevention in general education classroom, use with screening, early intervention, and then also at a targeted tier 2 or a tertiary intervention for special education related to emotional and behavior problems of children and youth. So across the board, tiers 1, 2, and 3, depending on how your state defines or works with those. I know some states have as many as 5 tiers. But the idea is that many of these materials can be used in different durations or different places of service. So particularly targeted to what I'll call Tier 1 and Tier 2, meaning a classroom or a small group setting, we're going to talk about the Behavior and Emotional Skill Building Guide for BASC-3. This includes scripts, activities to do with classes, talking points, discussion groups, and guided group sessions, and we'll go over that in more detail. For Tier 2 and Tier 3, We have group and individualized content in the BASC-3 Intervention Guide. This is a comprehensive collection of step-by-step programming using evidence-based interventions that are derived from the professional literature of education, psychology, and medicine. And it's taken us several decades to put all those together. I'm really proud of the work that's gone into this. We also provide some evidence-based support through parent guides. I remember teaching and always looking for additional content or materials that I could give parents besides just their notification of their legal rights. I remember one parent telling me that they had a pile of those at home. They didn't need any more from our frequent meetings. And so the parent guides that we'll go over, the idea here is to provide a way to communicate with families and also to give them some strategies and knowledge and information to enable them to better work with their own child or children. And then finally, fidelity of implementation checklists. I think we all know that the best results come when we actually implement the programming and strategies that we have in mind. And so these are paper forms to monitor intervention use to ensure that we have maximum student responsiveness. And it's also a way to make sure that teachers or paras or coaches, behavior coaches, or care providers kind of can keep track of what they're doing and make sure that they're following all of the steps. If you wanted to look at this in a graphic, this multi-tiered system of support, it all falls out or started with this big intervention guide. And there are 78 step-by-step interventions by problem type. So they're broken out by the scales in the BASC-3. So we have interventions specific to aggression, to anxiety, to depression, to withdrawal, to attention problems, to hyperactivity problems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And from those, we started with 40 scripted lessons. So for teachers who like a direct instruction approach and want to maybe don't feel comfortable teaching this material on the fly but really want a phrase-by-phrase walkthrough, there are 40 lessons with what the teacher says, what you might expect to get back from the student, and what would be the correct responses or how to redirect if kids get off topic. We've also worked with some school psychologists to develop 8 group guides, and then they have an opening session and a closing session, and there's homework for each of those things. And we have all of the parent forms and materials in English and in Spanish, which I think is pretty cool. And then at that bottom tier, or universal things that could go for prevention or smaller group intervention targeted programs, we have a skill builder set of brief activities, role plays. We have information on how to develop school-wide expectations. We have the lesson plans. Again, these are the same sets of lesson plans, recognizing that they could be used in a small group or a large group setting. And these activities number 36, and they have discussion starters. There are activities to do with students, as I said. There are role play opportunities, and then there are some ideas for kind of take it further. And you could do these in any given order by any given topic, or you could roll them out as part of a 9-week curriculum. I think that most of you would agree that we see improved outcomes when we use evidence-based practice. If we put the federal and legal mandates aside, we know that if we do things that work in general for most people, we're probably more likely to see similar kinds of effects. And evidence-based practice from the medical literature and in education involves both your professional expertise as well as the best research evidence and the values and expectations of you as a professional, your colleagues, the climate of your school, the resources that you have available, and your greater community. This graphic is really important to me on a personal level because no one of these pieces works in isolation. I can have the greatest level of professional expertise, But if I'm not using evidence-based practices or best research guides, my classroom, my outcomes are not going to be as good as they potentially could be. And if I'm doing those two things, but I'm out of step with the resources or the community setting in which I work, I probably am not going to get the best effects there either. So the idea here is to be cognizant that it takes sort of all of us to make these things work, that no one strategy or practice works 100% for every single student in every single school and every single community or with every single teacher. People have different styles and preferences in how they do things. And one of the reasons I think that's so important to me is because as a teacher, I saw colleagues doing things that maybe I wasn't capable, and vice versa. I also know that my brother is a teacher in San Jose, and he has his own strengths and weaknesses, and my parents were both teachers, and their development as professionals over 35 and 42 years respectively involved all of these things when we saw the best outcomes for students. So please also note that I am the first author on all of the products that we're going to talk about, so use your professional judgment in evaluating a best fit approach for the needs of your students and clients. I've put a tremendous amount of time and love and energy and work into these products, but I encourage you to be critical consumers of anything that is out there from me or anyone else, and I welcome and ask for you to think critically about the presentation that I'm giving today and ask questions about how this might work for you in a classroom or in a particular setting. Because really the only way we're going to see long-term big outcome changes for the group of students we call emotionally and behaviorally disordered or disturbed or disabled is if we have all of these pieces working together to improve our practice. What we have been doing for so long just isn't showing the long-term effects that we need. And this is such a critical and important area of need in our educational system that it's up to all of us to be critically responsive to the needs of the people that we work with. So the independent, meaning all three authors independently and collectively, Randy Camphouse and Cecil Reynolds and myself have each been working in schools across many states and countries 30 to 40 years each. That sounds a little better to me than saying 120 years of experience. That made me feel really old. So just know that all of us have put quite a bit of time and effort into bringing together what we think is the best of the research evidence. And to my knowledge, this work is unparalleled in its level to give you accessible and summarized research evidence to help you support your own decision making or support your work in practice in clinics or school settings. It bothers me that anybody that wants to put a stamp evidence-based practice on a product can do it, and there's no sort of FDA regulation for that. So what we've done is provide online, so you don't have to carry around such a heavy book, the research studies, the anthologies, the biographies, or the bibliographies for you to be able to look up any and all of those studies for what we're citing and referencing. So we did a comprehensive review over the last I guess it's been probably almost 20 years now, and the studies that are included involve all experimental manipulations of the variables. So these aren't talk pieces or opinion pieces. These are only experimental studies that were included in this work. And then what we did was look for the common steps and elements and combine those and translate or simplify language whenever we could to make them as easy as possible to directly implement and use as quickly as possible. We wanted a product that had high social validity, meaning it was easy to open up and use. And we got feedback from the BASC-2 intervention guides that sometimes some of the steps were too vague or may have had too technical a language used, and that it wasn't always easy to translate to give to somebody else. So we, when we edited this version, we added more interventions, and we also tried to create a language that was very straightforward. See some questions going on the Q&A over on the side. I'm not quite sure I'm all the way through that strand, so I'll let you guys keep going, and I'll make sure to grab that one at the end. So this is an image of the BASC-3 Intervention Guide, the BASC-3 Behavior Skill Builder, the Fidelity of Implementation Forms, and then you can see the parent tip sheets. Those are 4-page or 3-page foldouts. They're 4 with an insert, and those provide the strategies and insights, background for parents working with their kids. So that's what they look like. The materials are available in print, they're online, they're part of scoring reports, and they are also available as components of Review 360. Pearson folks can answer technical questions about how to get those. So let me break down for you a little bit what you might find in the Behavior and Emotional Skill Building Guide. This is the one that I see as being most useful at a Tier 1 or Tier 2. So if you have a school that's trying to start positive behavior intervention and support programming, and you're wanting to know what kind of interventions or plans to do in classrooms, or you want to walk through how to build school rules, this would be content or material for you. So there's it starts off with an administrative overview, which gives a timeline, how-to, content for professional development, features of positive learning environments, and then school-wide expectations that are aligned with social emotional learning. And the reason I put this in here was because my work in schools, I've seen that administrative turnover can be really high. Good principals may move on to be superintendents or move to bigger schools. Great vice principals move on to be principals sometimes. Do you all have, can you give me a show of hands or a thumbs up if that's true for you all? Great. Yeah, so I just see this real struggle sometimes that schools and groups of teachers are working really hard to implement positive behavior interventions and supports or have this positive climate or transformative effect. And then administration changes, and so where there was support, there may be someone who has a different agenda or maybe is less familiar. So the idea with this content was you can have a similar starting block regardless of the year, that everybody can get on the same page quickly. And then there are Tier 1 activities. I'm going to show those to you in just a second here. And then there's Tier 1 and 2, those lesson plans that I talked about, and the small group session guides. And for each of those, we've articulated how long we've seen them take in practice, and with a bounded range of what we think they maybe could or should take, because time is limited. So there's a graphic and a text representation of the model that lays out for people who may not understand the principles of prevention, using a universal screener, moving into early intervention procedures, comprehensive assessment, and intensive intervention. So we have that laid out that provides some justification and rationale. I've heard people say that was really helpful for school board presentations when they want to adopt a practice. We have a suggested timeline about making sure that you set expectations or schedule professional development ahead of time, that you don't roll something out right in the middle of testing, because people don't necessarily respond well if they're not in on the ground floor. And then we have some ideas for professional development, including the idea of getting teachers to sign a commitment sheet that says, I'm going to use the principles of TREE, teach, reinforce, enforce, and encourage. and to have your faculty and staff actually sign off on buy-in and say this is something that they're willing and interested to do and work on. We also have a graphic showing the alignment of some sample school-wide expectations about I respect myself, I'm a problem solver, I know when to help and ask for help. There's 3 school-wide expectations that fit within a PBIS model of not having more than 5, and we show how we feel like those line up with the SEL standards of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And we spent quite a bit of time and getting feedback from folks in schools on this because what we were seeing, or maybe I should just say what I tended to see was school rules that were primarily externalizing rules. So they were about aggression or hitting. Sometimes they were about respect, but it was about showing respect to others. And it was not necessarily about anything that was self-reflective. And I have sort of a personal mission that we teach and work with students to help develop their autonomy and ability to manage their own skills so that it's not always the environments that have to change and stay changed in order to support them. So in my ideal world, we have a system that teaches kids the skills and structures that they need, and then they learn those and are able to use those more independently or with less and less support. So I think self-reflection, even if that's from a behavioral perspective, is an important part of this. Otherwise, we see over and over again kids doing really well in very highly regulated, structured settings, and then moving into less structured settings and kind of falling apart because they don't have the skills there. The skills really belong to the teacher or the classroom structure. Does anybody agree with that or have some thoughts? See that as being something accurate? It looks like we only have hand raising as an interaction here on this. Do you, anybody at Pearson or Technology know, do they have like a thumbs up, thumbs down feature or just
No, we don't. They will have to write in the chat. The hand raise feature has been disabled.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to pretend that you guys are all nodding and maybe chanting, right on. So agree with you. That'll make me feel better on this end. Okay, so the idea of respect and problem solving and cooperation, we've also addressed how these skills get taught across areas of potential problems or disabilities. So we have problem solving and cooperation appearing in our section on academic problems. Here are the sort of chapter breakdowns: adaptability, aggression, anxiety, attention, conduct, depression, functional communication, hyperactivity, social skills, and somatization. And we've worked to make sure that we're covering all of these, the externalizing and the internalizing types of problems, the academic problems as well as the social emotional, because if they have their emotional behavioral disabilities under control but still can't do the math, read, or get a job, we haven't gotten to the goal that we really wanted. And so the classroom activities look like this. They've got some white space on the page. They each have each unit has a theme from the animal kingdom, and we start with what I call a conversation starter. And these are intended to be just 5 to 7 minutes long. They could be done as a warm-up at the beginning of a class. They could be done during a transition activity, like as you're waiting to, as you finish something up and you're waiting to line up for lunch. I have been in some schools that have morning assemblies before their full day starts. I think some of this could be incorporated into those kinds of scenarios. So the reason I used animals in this skill builder guide was because when I went into classrooms and was doing this, talking about hypothetical students, even as early as age 6, the kids thought I was talking about somebody in particular. So if I said, I want you to imagine a child or a student or a friend who has problems with their temper, or I want you to imagine a leader, I was unsuccessful in ever getting kids to not point to somebody in their class. And it happened to me over and over and over again. Does this resonate with anybody? So if you say, I want you to imagine someone who's a good leader, we had all these kids that would point to their favorite student in class, or that was for the little kids. For the older kids, if you were talking about something that was problematic, they got defensive, especially junior high and early high school, because they thought, they think it's all about them, right? So it has to be concrete and real. So what you'll see in these classroom guides is the use of animals, not to make it appropriate for little kids. These aren't zoo cartoons, but to have it be more concrete and have the characteristics or traits be about animals and something that they might be able to relate to without taking it personal. There are activities and small group guides. Some of them are worksheets that kids can do quietly at their seat. Some of them are things that they can do in small groups. Some of them are role play activities that take a little bit more movement and noise. So there are lots of options for all of these. And the small group guides have scripts and take-home materials in English and Spanish, and you can see how these are laid out with a description of what the topic is, a goal, a few goal statements, 1, 2, 3, duration, how long it's going to take you to do this lesson, 30 to 45 minutes, what kind of materials, if any, you need before you get started, what the learning objectives are, and then the procedures that you might use. So what we have in this set are illustrations of animals that embody positive qualities and characteristics or engage in amazing activities. So birds that use tools to actually fish for fish rather than wading out into a river or lake where there might be a predator that can eat them. They find a feather on the ground and they use the feather as a lure. The fish comes over and then the bird is able to catch the fish by using the lure without going out into the water. So we make parallels for adaptability, for problem solving, for using tools, for getting help, and the like. There's another unit that talks about a goby fish, which for most of its life, it is at the foot of a waterfall and allows food to come down the waterfall to sustain itself. But during the dry season, there's not enough water and not enough food. So the goby fish, and it is really legitimately a fish, actually has adapted to be able to scale the side of this waterfall several hundred feet to get up top stream to be able to access food. And so we talk about in that lesson difficulties in the environment that are beyond your control, doing something that nobody expects you to be able to do, doing something maybe even superhuman, and solving problems or working your way through seemingly insurmountable conditions. And all of the 36 lessons, the 9 weeks of units, are all along those lines. Leadership, respect, adaptability, problem solving, etc. Kelly asked a great question that I want to answer right now while we're talking about it, which is, are the different activities different for each age or grade level? And the quick answer is no. The conversation starters are written for the teacher with enough illustration that we would expect if you were a kindergarten teacher or a pre-K teacher, you would be able to pick out which words or phrasing might or might not be perfectly well suited for a 3, 4, 5-year-old. If you are in high school, there may be ways that you want to change this to appear more relevant to the high school kids in your classroom who are difficult to capture their attention to begin with. So I would expect that most teachers would use some degree of professional tweaking in how they take these conversations and activities. Just like you might, even from year to year, depending on the makeup of your classroom, you might have some groups of kids that work really well together, and some of the group activities would be fun and beneficial. You might have other groups where you think, I think this is going to be a worksheet group, and I'm really happy to use that. But the sequence for these is that you have this kind of mini conversation starter to get the ball rolling, to introduce some vocabulary, to start talking about the idea, and then you have these recursive activities throughout the week that develop on that theme or that idea, whether it's leadership, respect, problem solving, not giving up. So thanks, great questions, appreciate it. Then the BASC Intervention Guide has the full set of interventions across 11 of the most common problems in children and youth, according to national studies and surveys of parents, teachers, and school-aged children. And for each of these common areas, academic problems, adaptability, aggression, anxiety, attention, conduct, depression, functional communication, hyperactivity, leadership, social skills, somatization, the interventions are broken down by whether or not there's evidence in the research base that supports the use of this strategy or technique with this particular type of problem. In this one, we have illustrations for elementary and secondary schools that are different, because it would be a little more complex on some of these strategies to just be able to adapt them based on professional experience. So there are step-by-step procedures. I call it PI, prep, implement, and then evaluate. There are considerations for practice, what to do, how to troubleshoot if things aren't working. For every great idea I've ever had, I've had equally as many struggles as a classroom teacher. And for example, I remember using a token economy and having the students do loan sharking and playing dice with my token economy money. That's a illustration that you would find actually an example in the book of how to manage the resources. And I'm sure for those of you that are in schools, you can maybe come up with your own or similar stories of great ideas kind of gone wrong. So we try to provide as many of those as we could think of in this section. Elementary and secondary illustrations, I think I mentioned that already, but just to make sure you heard that. And annotated bibliographies of all the research studies. Now, in the past, this was all part of a hardcover book that was several inches thick, and we got some feedback that that was a little heavy to carry around. So although I was flattered that people occasionally would refer to it as the Big Red Book, now all of the bibliographies and the research study part is online, so you can log in and have access to that if you want. But if you just want the down and dirty, what do I do, then that's the only part you have to tote. So this PI approach is the preparation. What do I need to do to get started or to use this intervention? Are there any special trainings I need to do, any specific materials I need to prepare? Are there any skill sets I have to have? So some teachers are super organized, or school counselors, psychologists, behavior coaches, and they are really good with details. Others are a little bit more on the creative spectrum, I'll say, although you can be creative and detailed oriented as well. I'm not saying that you couldn't But based on your preferences, your personality, your temperament, your skill set. I started out as an emergency certified special education teacher. I was a general ed teacher and knew absolutely nothing about what I was doing. My skill set at that time was very different than in the later years of my career. So if somebody had asked me to do peer conflict mediation and resolution training, I would have been in way over my head to start off with that. But I certainly figured out how to do a token economy. I could use praise and behavior-specific praise and positive reinforcement and the like. So all of these have different skill sets, I guess, required. And so we talk about those in this. What do you need to do to be fully prepared to do this? And then how do you implement it step by step, step 1, step 2, step 3. And we provide examples of what that might look like with younger kids or with older kids. And then, again, those practical suggestions from how we've implemented this with students in the past. And then each one of these has an evaluation section, because I think that's the part we tend to leave out because we're so busy and we often don't have as amount of time that we would like. We forget to check our own practices and see if they really paid off in the way that we wanted. It takes time for you to engage in any of these interventions or strategies, and there's a trade-off for the things that you don't do when you choose to do some. So I would encourage you to always make sure you take that time to look and see if it's working, because by all accounts it should be, and to figure out what pieces might be missing or what structures or what's going on in the classroom environment or school community that needs to be changed to get the maximum bang for the buck. There's no one silver bullet on any of these things. They are all about fit between the needs of your students, the functions of those behaviors, the climate and community that you work in, and the resources that you have. Aggression covers the following 13 interventions. Everything from bully prevention, child-centered play therapy, which requires additional and specific training to implement, the good behavior game, mindfulness training, which is a newer and more upcoming intervention. That wasn't in the BASC-3 Intervention Guide because the evidence, the research base for it wasn't out there. So there are 13 interventions listed under the section or the chapter on aggression. There are 8 for addressing conduct problems. There are 7 for hyperactivity. And for any and all of these, you could go online, and what Pearson has done is put all together a source of data, the literature behind these. So if you are in a IEP meeting or you need to defend your practice to insurance in a clinical setting, you'd be able to identify what works and what doesn't and why. Attention problems, class-wide peer tutoring, computer-assisted instruction, contingency management, daily behavior report cards, modified task presentation strategies, multimodal interventions, parent training, self-management, academic problems, and these are all specific to kids with EBD. So it's not just that Advanced Organizers works with your best and your brightest students in an AP class. This is that Advanced Organizers will demonstrate improved academic performance specifically for students who have emotional and behavioral problems. Anxiety has 9, depression has 2, and we've broken out CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy for the sub-elements here so that you can see some of these might be things that can be supported, taught, implemented in a classroom setting. So your teacher's not the one doing the CBT, but a teacher could certainly be trained in how to facilitate a child or recognize when the child was engaging in relaxation steps in class, and to help with family involvement as an illustration, as well as many other pieces to this also. Adaptability interventions, functional communication interventions, social skills problems. And again, it doesn't mean that there aren't more strategies out there, but these are the strategies that have some support in the literature. And I think 10 years from now there will be more again. The parent tip sheets are intended to support professional practice by enhancing communication skills. All of the things I think that are here are things that many school psychologists, teachers, behavior coaches, special ed directors, etc., could do if they had time. We just don't all have that much time. And so what I've done is put together things to hopefully help save you time. We did a study a few years back and identified that teachers were spending 50% of their instructional time on paperwork. And we're just not going to see the changes that we need to see if we have to spend so much of our time in paperwork and preparation instead of in teaching and working directly with students. So these are for you to be able to explain, for example, attention or communication problems or social skills problems or aggression or hyperactivity or depression, and give, in layman's terms, some knowledge to the families or care providers about the problems that their child is experiencing, to explain the causes of the problem behavior, to give some suggestions for working with their child. So what we did was to go through all of these lists and identify pieces that we thought parents could or caregivers could do at home. And then we have a tracking sheet, basically, that can go back and forth between home and school that would keep track of how people were doing, monitoring progress. It's really just an updated version of kind of a sticker chart or a daily behavior report card. And then we provide some websites and additional resources for parents and families. And these have been pretty popular with parent centers, is my understanding, who want to have access to a stack of materials that they can provide. The documentation checklist helps you to maximize the intervention effects. And if you have professional learning communities going on at your schools or professional development, this is a way to help coach up what people are doing in their classrooms and provide feedback. So the fidelity checklist gives you a place to write down the targeted behavior or area of concern. It gives you a place to indicate what intervention is going to be used, and then over a 3-week period, it gives you a place to record and track what percentage of implementation is being used for any given intervention. So here's where you'd write the targeted behavior of concern, where you could handwrite in what intervention was selected, and then you could, for example, keep track of how a teacher was doing with implementation. And so if someone said, well, this really isn't working for Chris, he's still acting out, you might be able to identify and give some feedback that maybe not all the steps are being followed, that we're really only doing less than half of the practice that we want to identify, or to figure out what the barriers are. I'm trying to do this practice or strategy you told me to do, but I don't know how, I don't get it, or I don't have the support in my classroom, or it's just not conducive. And so you might decide to switch and try something else that was going to work. And maybe this is something that fits better within a teacher's repertoire or the structure of the classroom, and then fidelity goes up. And what you tend to see, I'm going to make green here be student behavior, is that let's say this is problem student behavior up here, because the fidelity of implementation of the strategy is low. When the strategy gets used, the problem behavior goes down. And that inverse relationship is demonstrated in lots and lots of studies. You can also, because I've worked so much in both general and special education classrooms. In fact, I'm going to be in schools the rest of this week, all day Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I try to make sure that I'm in schools almost every week if I can be. You can identify when you're going to try to do some of these things, because if the person who's implementing the program isn't on board with doing it, then what happens is the door gets shut and nothing gets done, and we don't know if the student is really responding or not responding to a program of change, or if the program of change isn't happening. So there's a way to keep track of who's doing what and whether or not those things got checked off in the way that we wanted. For example, I might say that I'm going to ask a student to give an example of a time he was misunderstood. And I'm going to do that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That's my plan, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So I tag that in some way. And then it turns out that I get called for jury duty, and I'm out this whole week. So that data really is not very useful in identifying if the intervention worked or not. So it's just a way to keep track. It's a form that you can make yourself, but maybe this saves you some time and helps you with a structure. There are also a ton of supplemental materials available, and I should have a technical correct number, but that slipped my mind. Maybe someone from Pearson can give me that number. So I'm going to go with a ton. We have ABC checklists, we have reinforcer surveys, we have for individuals, for classrooms, we have all kinds of self-monitoring forms, we have lists of high-interest activities, we have lists of things that you can do for hands-on demonstrations, we have a classroom inventory, we have forms for cognitive restructuring, we have daily behavior report cards, we have behavior tracking forms, we have common social skills problems, we have mindfulness forms and games, we have a good behavior game, a wheel for reinforcement, lots and lots of downloadable forms that you can use and reproduce as many times as you like. So big picture, here's what they look like in color. We've got a, now that I've figured out how to use a highlighter, we've got a intervention guide, we've got we've got a classroom skill builder guide, we've got an intervention guide, we've got a fidelity of implementation or documentation checklist, and then we have parent guides across all of those most common problem areas. And each of these has everything from lesson plans that are scripted out to group counseling scripts or targets. Those are in English and Spanish with the parent forms, and activities, strategies, and things you can try in your classroom, including info on how to make sure it's going to work for you and what to do if it starts not to. So the intervention guide, because some of you are asking questions, this fits well with kind of where do you find what where, is aimed at a school or clinical psychologist or behavior coach, somebody who's going to work with kids on an individual basis or has a little bit of knowledge about emotional and behavior disorders and needs a large compendium of choices in interventions with the step-by-step guides. So that's the intervention guide. You can get it online or in paper. It's organized around the scales on the BASC-3 teacher, parent, and student forms. If you say, oh, I already have the BASC-2 Behavior Intervention Guide, the big red book, what might be new about this? There's a digital offering. There's updated evidence for use sections that covered several more years. It's more streamlined with enhanced procedural steps. We've been told that it is an improvement in usability, meaning the design, there's a little more white space, there's some icons that grab your attention so the text isn't quite so dense, and there are all of those supporting documents for your use and enjoyment, if that's not too big a stretch. It replaces the BASC-2 classroom. So the Behavioral and Emotional Skill Building Guide, this is the green book, it replaces what used to be the classroom intervention guides, externalizing and internalizing. And it's got the classroom strategies, the use of the animals for the examples, and provides activities, small groups, discussion points, a few worksheets, things that you might want to do to expand or target any particular skill sets. There's 9 weeks of curriculum, but it's a real mix and match, so you can take the pieces that you want to use. So that took us through our first hour here. Again, I'm Kimberly Vannest. If you want to reach me, please feel free at kvannest@tamu.edu. If you need help with anything that is product or purchase related, that's not me. That would be the kind folks at pearsonclinical.com/BASC-3, and they've provided the phone number there for support. I'm going to hang around and answer questions that have either been written down already or answer any that continue to come up. Again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it and your participation. And hang out as long as you like, or if you need to go, feel free to email me later. And again, thank you. So Julie has a question here. Do your guides include tips on assessing and assigning to tiers? Also, is there a data management system included? That is a great question. I don't think that we really have a section, Julie, that specifically says, for example, if you get this type of a score here, you should try a tier 2. We have some general information about programming. The idea is that you wouldn't have to be married to every piece of any one of these product lines if you had favorite other systems to use. Now that said, believe that the BASC-2 BEST, the Behavior Emotional Screening System, has a full user's guide with it that talks about how you would implement the screening, how you would assign to tiers, or what best practices might be. I've got a little bit in the classroom guide that gives some general examples, but it's probably no more than a page. And there's no data management system included in this, like a progress monitoring system or something like that electronically. BASC-3 family of products, broader, and again, this might be some Pearson folks to follow up with you, but they have some progress monitoring systems both through Review 360 and also the BASC Flex Monitor, which allows you to track kids across time and identify the things that you want to keep track of. So thanks for your question. So Gina asks about the BASC system and how does this compare, or do they model their system after this system? I think the BASC system is describes more of the levels and reinforcers that you would use for kids who were acting out or having discipline problems, and putting them in a class that maybe restricted their access to things until they earned certain levels, more like a Boys Town model. Have to if you email me, Gina, I'd be happy to talk in more depth and get some more information that I could speak more accurately to that. So I know the BASC system. I've seen them in schools, but I haven't ever run one, so I don't know it. I don't know it well enough to tell you exactly. The Flex Monitor, F-L-E-X. I believe it's an online system that uses items from the BASC-3 to progress monitor students across time, and you can essentially create your own scale with those items. I believe it has reference back to some national norms, so it's not just a local. Yeah, Gina, I'd be more than happy to talk to you. So kvannest@tamu.edu. Oh, thank you, Chris. So Chris has got the link here for the Flex Monitor. And Gina, I'll do some looking on my end on the PASS system, and be happy to share that and go over pros and cons of both, or how they line up and how they might fit together, or where they wouldn't fit together. So. Hi, Jennifer. I'll let somebody with more information on that answer your question. Are these activities on the Q Global website? I believe that's the platform that they all use, is Q Global. And depending on what you already have access to, it may be included in that, or this may be, you know, like buying a book like you would on Amazon or something. So.
Hey, Kimberly, this is Chris. I work with Review 360. My colleagues work with Q Global, so I'm going to put my email out. If you have any Q Global questions, I can forward them over to the people I work with that have that information about Q Global. I apologize, I don't have that readily available.
No problem. Yeah, I wasn't sure how to answer that. So two different platforms then is what I hear you saying. The Review 360 uses a different platform system than the Q Global. Okay.
Yes, it is.
So through the Review 360, you have a comprehensive online system that will progress monitor and take you seamlessly. Is that correct, Chris? How it's set up for screening and intervention and assessment? Mm-hmm.
And the main difference between it and Q Global is Q Global is more geared towards individual type assessment and support, where you're working with one student or one child, where Review 360 provides reports that are more group oriented, where you could work with a classroom or a school or a grade.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Patty asked if we're able to access the PowerPoint and ask related questions at another date, and if the answer is of course. Feel free. Thank you, Charles. Thanks for your time. I'm in the fortunate position of being able to just close my doors these days. I'm not in a classroom anymore or in a school setting. So I do occasionally fight fires, but they're not the same kind as the day-to-day. So tomorrow I'll be back on a campus and I'll be fighting fires then. I really do appreciate y'all giving me so much time to learn about these things. I'll keep hanging around for questions, but for those of you that need to take off or get back to your roles, again, I just want to say thank you for your time, and also thank you for your attention to what I think is the challenge, perhaps even crisis of our future in schools. That this is a population that's long been neglected, and we have wanted for so long to be able to address the kids that fall through the gaps, and the kids address these problems before they are problems. And we've all, I think, said that and thought that for so long. And I think we're in a really unique temporally position as a society to be able to address emotional and behavior problems before they become chronic, intractable conditions. And I think there's greater awareness now more than ever for the need to not ignore these things, that they don't go away, and our society will be better for it if we will take the time to do this. Our academic performances will be better, our school climates will be better, our communities will be richer for it. So thank you for the work that you guys do every day out there. It's important. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Lisa. I'll just keep on asking questions, but y'all feel free to drop off if you need to. Just note of comment, I am born and raised from San Diego, but I did pick up the y'all. I've been in Texas for about 20 years. So David asks, how do you see the BASC interventions fitting with the school systems such as PBIS? My short answer is I think perfectly. I think that so PBIS is a process or a system, and I was a state trainer in Louisiana for PBIS, and I do PBIS work here in Texas and elsewhere. It's a great organization, APBS, if you don't have a professional organization. Also CCBD, Council for Children with Behavior Disorders, another outstanding professional organization. So PBIS sets up a structure where we look at how do we provide best universal practices for all students, academically, socially, emotionally, and I think that's what the skill builder gets at. How do we teach these skills to everybody? Recognizing your feelings, being able to initiate problem solving, asking for help, being able to cooperate. How do you self-manage when you're feeling frustrated or aggressive, and how do you even know that you're feeling those things? So the skill builder is about developing those repertoires in students, and then there are small group lessons guides for a tier 2 or for kids who need more support, and I think that's really consistent with a PBIS model. And it's very fluid, so uses and students can go back and forth between those levels of support as they're needed. I work a lot with military-dependent populations, and the needs that those students face vary, sometimes corresponding with deployment, sometimes corresponding with re-entry after deployment, but I don't know that those varying needs are specific just to that kind of a population. I think all kids have needs that kind of come and go with things that are going on at school, with their age, their development, their hormones. So 2 organizations. The first one is called CCBD. It is Council for Children with Behavioral Disorders. It is a CEC division. You can find them online, I'm sure. And then, let's see if I can type and talk at the same time. The next one was APBS. It's the Association of Positive Behavior Supports. Back in the day before PBS, the TV channel got upset and made PBS become PBIS. And both of those organizations have conferences every year that are wonderful, great place to learn and network and get support from colleagues. And they both have, thank you, Chris, and they both have journals that they mail out. CCBD has a newsletter that comes out 6 times a year. There's also a great conference in Arizona every fall called TECBD. It's affiliated with the University of Arizona. There's one in another great conference called the Midwest Symposium for Leadership and Behavior Disorders. That's in Kansas City, and that's every February. Hi, Charles. Great question. So Charles says, I know you mentioned that the research studies that you based these guides off of are pretty extensive and included online, but can you briefly speak to if the research studies were wide-ranging in terms of cultural factors and socioeconomic factors? Really super great question. So I guess the most accurate answer is it depends. There are some, we did the studies by types of problem behaviors. So, for example, functional communication, adaptability, things that you might see more characteristically with autism. The demographics in that research group tended to be more male, as an illustration. Not many of the studies report socioeconomic status of the individuals. Sometimes the studies will report for the community or the group or the area. So they might say it's urban, or they might say these are small rural schools in Texas, but not always. The research studies also are broken into two different larger categories. One that are group studies, sometimes random and controlled, meaning people don't know if they're in the study or not. Those studies report overall on the demographics of who's in the research group, who's in the non-treatment group, and they make those things equal so that it's fair to look for outcomes. Another large group of studies are single case design studies. So individuals with disabilities serve as their own control. They take a baseline series of data, repeated measures across time that says this is typical performance, and then they introduce an intervention and they look at what performance looks like repeatedly across time for that same individual. So in those single case studies, you sometimes get more individual level information about demographics and sociocultural variables. But again, not always. Sure. There are some interesting studies that have recently come out also, Charles, that are looking at the demographics of published studies. So they'll go back and look at a group of studies and say, what do the studies that look at kids with learning disabilities, who makes up those studies? And they report back to see if it's predominantly students from a Western European Anglo or an African American population, or are Native Americans included, things like that. There's some cool stuff out there that you probably could pull up with a Google if you don't have access to an academic library. That kind of summarizes that stuff. Anybody else? Anything else? So remember that the webinar handout is going to be sent out via a follow-up email after the session has concluded. Remember also, if you wake yourself up in the middle of the night with a burning question and you say, oh, I just have to know this, you can reach me at kvannest@tamu.edu, and I'd be happy to answer anything I can or get you in touch with someone who can. And then, of course, anything related to product, that would be under the domain of Pearson. And again, thank you to all the folks at Pearson for your help in setting this up and your willingness to sponsor the workshop and or the the webinar. Okay, I'll wrap that up unless somebody else has something else. I'll turn it back over to you guys.
I believe there's one more question.
Okay.
It's
there it is.
in our school system, a parent advocate has asked for an objective instrument to measure behavior, tiers 1 and 2, compared to RTI tier 1 and 2. Would you describe the BASC-3 as such an instrument?
So is the parent asking, or is the parent advocate asking for a universal screening that would look at all students in Tier 1 and identify kids who were at elevated levels of risk and maybe needed Tier 2? Or are they asking for a individual kid test, like they don't like the test you gave them and they want you to use something else? Just so I'm understanding the question fully. Thanks, Margaret. Okay. All right. So important issue. Margaret says they are wanting to make sure that African American males are not over-identified in the process. So identification. So 2 points, and somebody else may weigh in. And if you want a follow-up email, I'll try to send you some additional references. One, we have seen in using the screener, the BASC-3 BESS, B-E-S-S, Behavior Emotional Screening System, that when you use a universal screener across your whole student population, rather than looking at discipline rates to see who the high flyers are, right, where you've got maybe potential for more bias or kids get reputations and teachers kind of see them in a certain way and may refer accordingly. When you do a universal screener, if you pass that out to everybody, meaning the kids fill it out on themselves or the teachers fill it out on all their kids, and I've done this more times than I can count in more schools than I can count. It takes about an hour for a teacher to do a classroom. It takes kids less than 30 minutes to do themselves, maybe really brief depending on their age. You score all those, you will get back the data that says, here's the number and proportion of kids who are at your most elevated levels of risk. And you can look at it by gender and by age and by demographic category. You can also identify if you've got teachers who may be struggling in their classroom. I call them teachers at risk, not in a pejorative way, but to say maybe, if I was a high school teacher, if you put me teaching a third grade classroom, my expectations would probably be a little off in what I expected a third grader to be able to know and do. And maybe vice versa if you went from elementary school to high school. Sometimes teachers have personal lives, shocking, and it may be a bad year for them and they may be really stressed. Or they may have a particular group of kids that is not syncing well together or with him or her. And so sometimes you have a teacher at a school that will disproportionately refer just in numbers, not by ethnicity. They just see their entire class as being really problematic and being very at risk. And that can alert you with the BESS. That can alert you through their validity, their pattern flags, and their consistency indices, whether or not it's an individual doing the referring or doing the screening, doing the completing of the rating for the screening. If it's might need to have a second rater take a look at things. So I have been told that using universal screening can decrease the disproportionality that occurs in seeing which kids need services or risk. I have also seen that screening can identify numbers of kids that were internalizing that you didn't see or think about needing help with as well. So that's the BEST. That's a screener. The BASC-3, and I'm not the best one to talk about this, but the psychometric properties of the BASC-3, from my research and as far as I know, are exceptionally high quality and can give you a reference point to a national norm, just like the BEST does, so that you don't have local geopolitical, social, economic factors that are as heavily weighted in the recognizing of whether or not a kid has a certain need. And so you can use those assessments and the results you get from those assessments to not just compare back to a class or a school or a district, but also back to a national norm or level, which sometimes means you have more kids identified than what you expected, because you may be in a situation where students are doing better than average or worse than average. Does that make sense? Is it Marguerite or Margaret? I should say Ms. Jeffer or Dr. Jeffer. Okay, good. Thank you. Again, please do email me if I can point you in the direction of more information. That's about the far edge of my knowledge base right there. But there are people who study this and do nothing but this and are experts in this area. I'd be more than happy to hook you up with them or their work so you could have more information than what I can give you. All right, send me an email. I'll be happy to do it. Well, good luck out there to you all. Good luck fighting the good fight. And know that there are people out here that care about what you do, think it's important, and are here to help support you. And we like hearing from you and wishing you the best as you finish up this academic year.
Thank you to our participants, and a special thank you to Dr. Vannest for a great presentation today, and to Chris Uzenik for your chat box expertise. And that does conclude our webinar.